Well, thank you all for coming this morning. I am a psychologist in Asheville, North Carolina. I work with a lot of folks with chronic health issues. Some of the strategies that can be used for chronic health conditions kind of apply to the chronic stressor that all of us are going through. So I wanted to use a strategy from acceptance and commitment therapy, and we'll kind of work together in order to develop a kind of hypothetical patient model. I think you can probably see a lot of yourselves in this kind of like collective exercise. So one of the ways to do that is actually to kind of start talking about the types of experiences, the types of emotions that we have when everything's going really well. When we're feeling really good about ourselves, when we're feeling really good about the world, what are the typical kinds of emotions that you might experience? Would you feel calm, happy, joyful, excited? Excellent. What other kind of emotions show up when you're kind of in a good state, an enjoyable state? Generally calm, generally at ease, hopefully. Great. And then when you kind of think about the way your mind talks to you when you're in that more enjoyable state, what might it say kind of about you, about your capabilities? Like when everything's going well, how does your mind talk to you about you? Yeah. So kind of positive thoughts, creative thoughts. Tends to be that, you know, when our physiology is kind of more settled, we actually have more kind of creative problem solving abilities. Basically, the more stressed that we are, the more reactive our responses can be. I often think if, let me just check the chat. Yeah, there can be kind of a can-do attitude. And thank you for whoever's posting in the chat box. It's actually also a good way if you want to type in your responses into the chat box. That's a way to kind of continue this conversation. I think often when people have this, you know, often there's kind of less self-referential thoughts. Often when people are kind of calm and at ease, there's less thinking about the self, right? Tends to be that we tend to be more outwardly focused. Right? So if you think about when you're at your best state, you know, how do you think about others? How do you think about the world? What are the sort of thoughts that would show up? Yeah, I'm competent, right? I can face the challenges that are showing up for me. You know, like I have good skill sets. Ever have thoughts like that? Kind of enjoyable when they show up, yeah. So part of the behavioral model is I don't actually always know when people are experiencing this. Like it's hard to tell as an external observer that someone's in that particular mind state. But I can usually take a pretty good guess that someone's in that state if I watch them do certain behaviors. So if someone was like following you around with a video camera and watching you feel happy, joyful, excited, what would they probably see you do more of? Yeah, so kind of socializing more. Yeah, so more social gestures. There's some pretty fascinating research actually on kind of the stuff our body can do, our face can do when we are in our safety system. So it turns out when we tend to be threatened, what we tend to do is we use very, very small hand gestures. We'll often kind of cross over the body. We'll avert eye gaze. We'll kind of have still facial expressions. And you can kind of see like it's a little aversive to continue to talk to someone who has a fairly like static presentation. So there's actually good indications that when people are feeling safe, they tend to use kind of bigger social gestures. They smile more, they make eye contact. So it's an interesting phenomenon. You can usually take a guess about what someone's state is just by like, you know, how they're kind of socially interacting, right? So what else? People would socialize more. They might use kind of bigger gestures. What else do people do when they're in more of a kind of at ease place? Do people exercise? How about you? Like when you're feeling most calm, most at ease, do you find yourself moving your body more? Okay. And if you think about kind of use of social media or use of news, like when you're feeling most at, yeah, dancing, excellent. When you're feeling most at ease, right? How much news do you consume? Like every day, all day long? Yeah. Kind of tends to be, actually, yeah, very good point, is that we tend to be more engaged uh, with meaningful activities, right? So we don't tend to kind of, you know, like less news, less social media, right? Let's see. I think there's another thing kind of in talking about um, being engaged. So for a lot of us, the transition that's recently kind of happened has really disrupted a lot of our regular schedule. So we know that the rates of depression are about 3 times higher for folks that don't currently have a job. I think part of the reason of that is all the kind of, you know, like the stresses of being unemployed. But part of it also just the structure, just the routine that people tend to have when they are employed. So you can think about days maybe that you've had in recent weeks where you got up, you showered, you changed into work clothes, you kind of started a particular routine. You can think about the mental state that you found yourself on that day versus a day that you kind of stayed in your pajamas all day, or you kind of missed your usual routine. Can you guys see a difference between that? Yeah. So there's a way where sometimes our routine, our kind of use of healthy schedule, like it's a good indicator that we're in kind of a more beneficial place. So I'm writing stuff in particular areas on here, but I wanna kind of acknowledge that there's more to this story than just kind of feeling good and acting in particular ways that help you to feel good. And so I wanna kind of write out when things are going less well, you know, when you're in a more distressed state, what are the kind of emotions that might show up? How have you been struggling recently? Anyone feel anxiety in recent days? So I'm gonna kind of put that up here, and I'll circle back to why, right? But we can kind of just say, I missed my text box here. Sorry, that's just gonna stay up there. Okay. Anxiety. Yep. Difficulty sleeping, tearfulness, feeling of listlessness, right? There might be a sense of like, yeah, like oscillating between everything's fine, I don't need to pay attention to anything, to kind of going back to ruminating and kind of like chronic problem solving. Yeah, can't kind of like stay on what you're doing because the mind just goes off to the next problem. Yeah, feeling more frustrated. Yeah. Yeah, annoyed, kind of reactive. Yep. Let's see. Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, you know, if you are basically spending all of your resources in an agitated state, you're not sleeping well. Tends to be that a lot of people are going to feel kind of more fatigue during these times because they're using their resources left, right, and center. Right? I wonder. I mean, so these are a lot of kind of emotional words. When we think about kind of the way the mind talks about the self or about the world, like what are some of the thoughts that some of you guys have had? How does your mind kind of trash talk to you about you? Yep. So that's part of the like hopelessness piece. Yep. And I know one that can kind of show up for me is not feeling like I can handle what's in front. So there's kind of a feeling of not being competent to handle the life stresses that are there. I can't handle this. Too much. Right? What about kind of the world? You have thoughts about like other people, other systems? Does blame ever show up? I can't be the only one. Someone just raise your hand.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself kind of blaming
Yeah.
folks? Yeah. Okay. So I think we kind of get the sense of it, right? And first of all, I want to just kind of point out. I'm glad we're actually getting some kind of momentum and people kind of sharing this. Generally, when I start with this, I often start the conversation kind of more on the more comfortable side of the conversation. But I'm just noticing like people are kind of talking a lot more, and they're kind of piping up around these areas of discomfort. I think it's helpful to kind of acknowledge that whatever's going on with you is actually like a very, very shared experience across everybody. That all of us are spending a lot more time kind of being in this place with a lot more anxiety, a lot more denial, a lot more listlessness, ruminating, just kind of stuck in problem solving mode. Right? A lot of us are feeling disempowered. A lot of us are kind of stuck in blame cycles. But I want to kind of finish out my little diagram here, and then I'll show you why I'm writing it in particular parts. But I want you to imagine that I have no idea whether you are actually experiencing rumination or fatigue or less focus or annoyance. I wouldn't know that for sure, but I could probably take a pretty good guess that that's what you were experiencing if I started seeing you do particular things, right? So one of them that we saw is like, if you were more tearful, I could probably guess you're probably in a distressed state. Or if I saw you not sleeping, kind of getting up in the middle of the night, that might be a way that I could tell, okay, cool, this person's feeling more agitated. What are some other ways? Like, what are the ways that your system is kind of demonstrating, oh yeah, I'm not doing so hot? Mm-hmm. So not eating. Mm-hmm. Yep. Comfort eating. I will say that I'm like I'm kind of surprised that the government officials in Colorado didn't figure this out earlier. That they decided after a couple days that the liquor stores and the marijuana stores were actually essential businesses, because it turns out a lot of people are using chemical coping to kind of get through this time. So probably drinking too much or consuming more kind of comfort food, drugs, and alcohol. Yep, yep. So someone mentions kind of escapism, right? So that could be kind of other side of it, of like, I'm not willing to look at the news. I'm not willing to look at social media. It's all too much, right? And the other side of it, does anyone find that their kind of news consumption or social media consumption is going way up? Yep. Yeah. Yep. And then someone mentions kind of lack of self-care, right? And that's kind of a good, it's like a good indicator. If like you wouldn't know for sure that someone was distressed, but if you saw them kind of wearing the same clothes for 3 days, or they hadn't showered, or there's a stack of dishes piling up, you could probably take a pretty good guess that that person is distressed. Yeah. Is anyone noticing isolation? Yeah. So it tends to be, I mean, there's an interesting thing. We are such a tribal species, that we often can have kind of periods where we're reaching out to the network to help make us as regulated as possible. But when we stay in a chronically agitated state, it starts to feel like we actually are maybe harmful to the social network. Like it's all just too much to kind of reach out to people. We don't want to be a burden. We don't want to stress other people out. And so it tends that we kind of get more isolated, but then we cut ourselves off from those ways of kind of helping ourselves get more regulated. Right? So it's like isolation is just super, super common. Yeah. I think that's enough of a kind of picture. Is there anything else that you would kind of notice as an external observer? Yeah, yeah. So that's a kind of another thought. Don't want to be a burden. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm quite certain, that burnout, caretaker fatigue is kind of another side of that. So very often with burnout or caretaker fatigue, it's kind of a balance between needing to be selfish and make sure that you are a sustainable resource, as well as being able to help support from the overflow. So there's a saying, you give from the overflow of the well and not from its depths. So the idea is that, like, if you're trying to lend support or leadership, you really have to be on top of your sleep and your diet and your hygiene, all those things that actually makes you a sustainable resource, because otherwise you will get kind of burnt out and no longer be able to help others. So I want to kind of, like, I've written each of these things down in particular spots on here for a reason. So I want to kind of just let you a little bit under the hood about kind of like why I've written them where they are. So the first thing is basically I have written, let's see, yeah, that works. Basically, I've written things that are kind of on the left-hand side of the screen. The idea is that these are generally things where the motivation around these behaviors and internal experiences is around avoidance. There's an unpleasant thing that's happening, and then we're doing our best kind of in the short term to make the bad thing go away, right? So you can kind of imagine. Actually, I'm gonna finish padding this out and then I'll describe all the parts of it. The ones on the right-hand side are ones where the motivation is much more about approach. They're things that we're trying to move towards, right? And then I've written things that are above the line. This would be, things above the line would be external or observable behaviors. Observable. And these things kind of below the line would be internal experiences. Okay. So the idea is each of these parts kind of relates to each other in various ways. One is that we tend to act in such a way when we're feeling down, when we're feeling really bad, there are some pretty predictable ways that people will respond to that. And unfortunately, what those tend to do is they tend to reinforce those particular mind states. So if I'm super anxious and I want a sense of control over my experience, one of the ways that I might go do that is I'm going to watch a whole lot of news. I got to find out the information that I got to, need to know, right? Unfortunately, the news is never going to be good. It's never going to be, hey, you can relax now, everything's taken care of, right? And so it tends to actually be, as I'm engaging in that activity, I get more and more anxious, right? Same thing that if I'm feeling like I don't want to be a burden to other people, I'm going to be pretty likely to be self-isolating, right? And unfortunately, that's going to reinforce the notion, I feel like terrible, other people don't want to be around me. It's going to, I don't want to kind of take this burden because I haven't showered or I haven't kind of taken care of myself in any way. It's all going to be too much for other people, right? So there's a way where when we're acting from these particular places, it actually reinforces those mental states. And what we would call that is an avoidance loop, right? This is part of, sometimes we talk about downward spirals with people. So this is part of how downward spirals happen, is that, it continues to be kind of self-reinforcing. So similarly, there's another loop kind of on this side. And I hope all of you can kind of remember times that it has been better. Right? I hope that you can kind of remember what it was like to have a certain sense of momentum or positive direction. We might call that an approach loop. Right, where like things are going kind of well. I've been on a good routine with exercise. I've been socializing well. I wake up in the morning, I have a little bit more energy. That means that I'm more likely to go outside, and kind of has, you can kind of think of it as an upward spiral, right? So problem solved, right? Super easy. Just get in the approach loop and everything will be fine. Easy, yeah? Okay, cool. Well, end the talk. Thank you so much. So obviously, there is a really, really important line here, which is here. And it's basically like, how do you get yourself to start acting in a way that is skillful, that's going to actually promote well-being, even though you don't feel like it, even though you may be very anxious or overwhelmed? How can you act skillfully even if you don't want to? Right. So I wonder, I mean, there's a lot of ways that people can do that, but I wonder, like, what do you call that line? What would we actually name that? It could be actually physical medications, pharmaceuticals. Yeah, someone says fake it till you make it. Yeah. It could be life-changing. I think there's like, it's helpful to kind of find your own word for this. So I had someone earlier in the week that they referred to it as their center line. And the way we kind of like helped unpack that is that it was the things that kind of remained important to them, regardless of whether they were in a bad place, right? So for them, it was a lot about their kids, right? That like they wanted to just pull the covers over their head and hide out from the world, right? But like, because they valued their kids, they were willing to kind of get up, go outside, and do things that were going to be more life engaging, right? We could call it fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it's kind of an interesting one. I like to use skills as a way of saying it. That like, there's a question around how can you be skillful even when you're flooded, even when you're overwhelmed. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's a part of the diagram that I haven't kind of included yet. And it's actually the center of the wheel. There's an interesting part. Oh, does that work? There. Does that work? Yeah, me noticing. So there is it's an important part with this is that anytime that we're trying to do a transition from a place that has more suffering to a place that is more skillful in our actions, that like the place that it crosses over is actually being aware that you have gotten stuck in some way. So this is where some of the use of mindfulness strategies, meditation strategies can be especially helpful. Those are very, very good strategies to essentially get you to pay attention to the current moment and see where you might be stuck or see where you might be acting skillfully or unskillfully. So next week, Scott McGregor is going to be doing a talk on mindfulness-based stress reduction. Yeah. So someone kind of points out that just noticing that you're driving off the road, if we think about like the feedback system of driving a car, like you want a tight feedback system where you're actually able to respond really, really early on, right? You want to be driving more like a sports car instead of a boat, right? So you want your feedback system to be very, very tight that you can say, oh, I had a lot of trouble sleeping last night. Rather than kind of laying around the house all day, I really need to make sure that I'm prioritizing going outside and getting sun on my skin, right? Kind of prioritizing that earlier, having faster feedback loops rather than saying, I haven't slept well for 5 nights in a row. Oh my God, what do I do? Right? So that mindfulness allows you to actually be a little bit faster, a little bit more skillful in the responding, a little bit earlier in the chain. So in next week, Scott McGregor is going to be doing a whole module on mindfulness-based stress reduction. And that's a really, really good system to use for training mindfulness. The more time that you could be prioritizing towards mindfulness, really the better. It's probably one of the single best mental health interventions that you can do. I know Brian and Chad really routinely recommend mindfulness, and it's for really good reason. That there's all sorts of mental health improvements, physical health improvements that a regular mindfulness practice can do. So I'm not going to go super in depth with mindfulness practice, but I'm just going to give you kind of a 3-minute exercise to do. And then if you like it, you can always come back next week and I'll suggest some resources at the end to do that. Okay. So what we'll do is mindfulness of the breath. And the way that we can start this practice, you don't need to necessarily change any positions. But it's just to be aware that this entire time that we've been talking, your body has known exactly when and how much to breathe in, and when and how much to breathe out. And so for the next 3 minutes, just try to keep most of your attention just on the sensations of breathing. It's as simple as that. You might begin to notice that each in-breath, each out-breath is slightly longer or shorter than the one that preceded it. Perhaps beginning to notice whether this next breath is a little bit more in the chest, a little bit more in the belly. You might begin to notice that one nostril is slightly more open or closed than the other. That there's a very subtle difference of hot versus cold for each in-breath or out-breath. See if you can feel the sensations of the breath entering and exiting the body just at the upper lip, just for a moment there. And you might also play with seeing where the sensations of breath are in the other parts of the body, seeing if you might notice how the breath moves the shoulders, sides of the ribs, and even the low back. And then we'll take one more deep breath, nice full deep breath into the body. See if you can breathe it all the way down into the diaphragm, all the way down into the bowl of the pelvis. And then let's just sigh it out. So that was a whopping 3 minutes of just slowing down to check in with the breath. Can you notice a shift? Did anyone, raise your hand if you can, good, bad, or indifferent? Yeah. So I'm wondering, was that helpful? Is that the sort of thing that good, yawning, excellent, excellent. Yeah, a lot of the times we don't kind of give ourselves breaks throughout the day. And this is it's really, really important for our physiology. It's really important for our psychology to actually give ourselves these moments of pause, of being at ease. From this place, we might be able to kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, what's important for me to be engaging with today? Right? How can I act skillfully given the situation that I'm in? So back to this model. So that's kind of the me noticing part. It's just being able to take a break, take a pause, and just kind of check in. Okay, well, what do I want to do next? I want to kind of draw out one or two more lines here and then make a couple more kind of suggestions for various things that might be helpful in the coming weeks. So if this line is skillfulness or faking it till you make it, or another way of saying it is doing what matters, I do want to draw another line here, which is kind of that's the other way. And it's the position that basically all of us are in to one degree or another, which is that this is vulnerabilities, this line. And it's the idea that like you can be doing everything right. You can be on top, you can be very, very skillful, right? But still, you don't have control over all the circumstances that are going on. And you can experience illness, you can experience financial stress, you can experience the global issues that we're having right now, right? So you can be doing kind of everything right, but still kind of find yourself backsliding into a place that's more reactive. So I think there's a thing when I recognize that really kind of points to just how important skillfulness is. You know, because there's always a balance between your skillfulness, how effective you are, and how well the environment can match that, can meet those needs. Right. So if you're looking for hunting and like if you're talking about hunters and gatherers, right, you could take a really, really skilled Kalahari bushman. You can put him in the middle of the desert because his skill set is so good, right? He's probably going to find food. Right? You could also imagine someone who, you know, whose skill set's really terrible, right? And you put them in the middle of a grocery store, maybe they'll still be hungry, right? So there's a way, like if what you want is well-being, if what you want is greater connection, you can always improve your skill set, even if the environment is super challenging. This is part of the behavioral model. We always just kind of work on what can you as an individual be doing to get your needs met, rather than waiting for the environment to be better. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I want to bring up kind of three areas if we're talking about well-being that might be helpful just to make sure that we're putting some time and attention to. And so this acronym is ACE. All right. So ACE stands for accomplishment, connection, and enjoyment. So you can kind of think of these as being like different ways that well-being is pursued. And they're kind of like, they have different qualities to them. So I'm curious, for accomplishment, how many of you feel like you've accomplished less in the past week or two than you're used to accomplishing? Is that a pretty common thing? Yep. So there's kind of a question with this. It's like it's given the environment as it is. If accomplishment feels like it's relatively, so someone's actually saying that they're just accomplishing different things, which is great. Because the idea is that it's just the sensation of accomplishment that's important. Because the environment has shifted, you may not be able to accomplish things quite the same way. And if you're currently off work, you're not going to be getting that same sense of accomplishment for accomplishing work tasks. But that doesn't mean accomplishment is any less important. So given the kind of current life circumstance, wherever you are in terms of your housing situation, your financial situation, are there ways that you could enhance the sense of accomplishment? How would you do that? Yeah. So that would be making a list of different activities that you want to get done for the day. And each day, at the end of the day, kind of checking them off, striking them out. Yeah, for sure. It's a really good one. How else could you enhance your sense of accomplishment? Yeah. So there's a certain amount where pausing, using our mindfulness skills to actually like let the good feeling hit you of having accomplished something. Yep. Setting goals, working on it each day, rewarding yourself for what you do, no matter how small a step. And I mean, there's a focusing on small steps, absolutely. So there is a way, particularly with depression, this is very very common, where the sense of accomplishment is really really hard to attain. So if you ask someone to say start an exercise routine, that would be like probably pretty helpful for all of us in terms of improving mental health. If you had someone who was setting a goal of saying, well, the only way I'm going to feel a sense of accomplishment is that I went on a marathon. It turns out that person's not going to get much of a sense of accomplishment for a really long while, because that's a very very hard goal. Instead, what they're going to get is a repeated sense of punishment. Oh, I didn't get my goal met. I didn't actually complete the thing that I wanted. So very often when we're trying to enhance accomplishment, we actually want, like, it doesn't matter how small the step is. It just matters that you're doing the step. Right? Sometimes I get people to literally jump off a piece of paper as a way of driving that home. So jumping is a verb. Often the amount of change that we want is like jumping out of a two-story window. We want things to be radically different. Right? But the height of change is really inconsequential. What matters is that you do the thing or not, right? So it's more like jumping off a piece of paper. Yeah. So with accomplishment, I want to actually give you guys a kind of a way that you could, it's a model for behavior change that I think might be helpful for you. And it's called, it's BJ Fogg's model. And basically with BJ Fogg, there's 3 rules for whatever behavior you're trying to change. The rules are: it has to be easy. You have to be able to do it every day in under 30 seconds, right? So say the behavior was that you wanted to spend more time outside. You think that might be helpful for you, right? Well, then the question is it easy? Yeah, hopefully it's easy for all of us, yeah? Right, can you do it every day? Yep. Right, and can you do it for less than 30 seconds? That's it. Yep. So if you can say yes to each of those, then the idea is that you would say before or after X, I will do Y, right? If you can do it in under 30 seconds. So if we were trying to groove a behavior of going outside more, connecting with nature, right? It might be after I have my coffee, I will walk outside and look at the sky for 30 seconds. Right? That 30 seconds is not going to necessarily fix everything. It's not going to radically transform things, but it's much more about grooving the habit. So that becomes just part of the kind of default behavior. If you can do that successfully for like a week or two, right, then you switch and you just keep tacking on another 30 seconds, another 30 seconds. Does it make sense? Helpful? Okay.
Yes.
So the other 2 factors here, connection and enjoyment. So great, if you can accomplish all sorts of things kind of throughout the day, that's great. It's a form of well-being. But what about connection? Right now, a lot of us, the way that we would normally connect with people is kind of challenged. How could you increase connection in your current circumstance? Mute yourself. Yep. So phone calls, apps that allow video chatting like Marco Polo. And we're all using Zoom. Yep. Online social videos. Yep. Online communities, meeting with colleagues, online knitting groups, movie watching. This is a great group. Good ideas. Yeah, walking through the neighborhood, waving and greeting neighbors, talking when you see other people, even if it's only just for a few minutes. Yeah, there's a certain way where this is like it's like being friendly and reaching back out to the kind of networks that we know are stressed is actually part of the ways that we're kind of socially responsible for each other. Right, so it's not just you having this difficulty, it's everyone having this difficulty. And so you can at least kind of like decide, do I want to help kind of ping the network and make sure the network is healthy, right? Turns out when you do that, you also tend to have your social needs fed. Make sense? Yeah. So what about enjoyment? How could we enhance sense of enjoyment in the current circumstance? Yeah, so giving yourself kind of reasonable, healthy rewards, and maybe treating yourself in some ways. Yeah. So, sometimes with depression, one of the things that we do is actually just pleasure scheduling. We make sure to put in our calendar on a regular basis something that's going to be enjoyable. I had someone who, like, it was amazing what a difference having a small bit of cake with a friend on a weekly basis made. It was huge. Yeah. So someone's mentioning appreciating small things, sensory delights. This is part of where our mindfulness is very, very helpful. If you can kind of slow down to actually make contact with the natural forms of beauty that are available. This is also where gratitude practice can be really helpful. Part of good gratitude practice is not just this kind of cognitive thing of saying, oh, I should be thankful for X, Y, and Z. It includes this kind of mindfulness piece where you make contact with, I'm actually really thankful that these few things are there. My situation could be worse if I didn't have this. Right? And then part of it is actually feeling it, looking for the body sensations of where that sense of gratitude or pleasure actually is, and really trying to make contact with it. Yep. So doing creative stuff. Someone's mentioning playing music, gardening. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. In some ways, like this time has a like it has a transformative quality to it potentially, where everything's kind of shaken up and a lot of the old systems that we would be used to for telling us how to structure our time and energy, a lot of that's been really disrupted. See, there's a kind of interesting platform here where you can really be making statements on a daily basis with your activity about what is life really worth, what are the things that you want to spend your precious time and energy on. Yeah, I mean, so I would start with the idea of minimum effective change, and so that's why I partly introduced the BJ Fogg model of 30 seconds. So I hope, like with all the stresses of still having a job and commuting and caring for kids, do you have 30 seconds? So if we were to start to kind of train more wellness behaviors with you, things that would just enhance enjoyment, it sounds like that was the kind of thing that you would want to enhance. What is one way that you could spend 30 seconds enjoying yourself on a daily basis that's easy? Yeah, so listening to a song, saying a quick prayer. Yeah, so like it's not to say that listening to a song or saying a quick prayer fixes everything. This is not really about fixing all of the kind of problems that are facing. It's more about simple strategies for enhancing mental well-being given the circumstance that we're in. So I'll give you an example of it, and this kind of fits. Is after I come home from work, I will hit play on a music selection and dance for 30 seconds. It doesn't fix everything, but it kind of tends to put us more on that right side that's just slightly more engaged, slightly more available. Does that sound helpful? Now, far be it from me to stop you after 30 seconds. I'm not going to like come over and like press pause. It's much more about grooving the habit of actually just starting it. If you want to keep dancing, go for it. So I want to take maybe, this is kind of the general model. I hope there's parts in this that are helpful for you all. Usually with doing kind of behavior change stuff, I think it's helpful not to kind of overshoot goals. It's just to have a couple things, one or two that you're doing for this week that are going to enhance well-being. Inevitably, what happens is that the more that we engage with those sort of effective coping strategies, we start to naturally do more of those things anyway. So often with minimum effective change, it's like we don't have to fix everything. We're just trying to slightly change the system so that we're more on the kind of right side. Right. But I wanna see, I mean, so people are mentioning other kind of problems that are showing up, difficulty sleeping or other areas. Are there other things that you might other tools that we could kind of pull out for you? Are there other things that you want to make sure that we touch in on today for this group? Hmm. Yeah, so feeling like future has been stolen, feeling hopeless about the future. Yeah. And people talking about panic or having difficulty with planning. Yep. Boy, there's a lot that's good in there. Good as in things that we could spend a lot of time talking about. And someone mentioning kind of meditating before bed, insight timer, sleep meditations, making it easier to fall asleep. And there's enough here that it's kind of it's helpful for other classes, and I'm definitely helpful to do that. And we had also discussed doing an FAQ. So if there are resources or techniques that can be helpful kind of in the future, I'm happy to keep kind of sending stuff your way. I guess I wanna I wanna come back actually to panic and feeling super freaked out in the moment. And I'll give you kind of a quick strategy that can be helpful for just kind of settling the nervous system. The pieces around sleep quality, hopefulness for the future, a lot of that stuff. I'm absolutely happy to kind of work on that further, but maybe we could have another session or do it kind of through the FAQ. Um, so I want to give you a technique that sometimes is really helpful. I find it especially helpful actually for folks that have trauma history, and it's a tapping exercise. So it takes all of 5 minutes or so, and it's a way basically to help settle the nervous system. Does that sound okay? Yeah. So there are three main components of the tapping technique. It's the breath, the phrases, and the physical gestures. Now, a lot of folks who are into tapping as a technique tend to kind of get a little bit over elaborative, in my view, on it, in which they'll say, oh, you need to tap this particular part this number of times, and it's only good for this particular symptom. And I think it's kind of overly complex. The way that I like to do it is that it's basically a simple system regulator where we're helping slow the breath, we're helping bring online the ability to verbalize the experience, which is something that goes down when we're in a panic state. So we're actually bringing language back online. Yep. And I'm going to clear the whiteboard and basically, yep. Thank you. Okay, so there's three main components to tapping. It's the breath, the physical gestures, and the phrases. The breath is similar to what we've done already. It's basically 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. All right, so you might be breathing in. You can just all join me on it. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4, and in and out. Okay. So that's part one of the technique. The second part is the phrases. So the idea with phrases with tapping is that you want two kind of opposite phrases that are both true. And it has the format of saying, even though I am X, I am Y. All right, so even though I am anxious, I am safe. Right? Even though I'm feeling disconnected, I know others love me. Right. So the thing with this is you can't have either of those phrases be false. It can't be some kind of namby-pamby made up phrase that you don't authentically believe in. Right. So it's helpful to have both be true. I'm just going to stick with even though I am anxious, I am safe. Right? Because if you're able to have the luxury to do this technique, you're probably safe in the moment. Okay. And then the physical gestures are just taps on particular parts of the body. Most of them are around the face and the upper body. Tends to be these are fairly kind of vulnerable spots, and when they are touched, it tends to activate the safety systems of the brain. All right. So you can all try it with me. You can choose your own phrase to do this, but I'll just walk you through each of the points, and then I'll include them kind of in the chat box when we close, so you can copy them and make sure that you have them for reference. Okay. So we do about 15 to 30 taps each spot, and we'll just start with the top of the head. So deep breath in, tap 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 tap. Even though I'm anxious, I'm safe. Okay, deep breath in, tap, 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 tap. Even though I'm anxious, I'm safe. Deep breath in, tap, 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 saying your phrase. Okay. Second spot is directly above the eyebrows. All right, so both hands, deep breath in, saying your phrase. Tap, 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 tap. And again. Deep breath in, saying your phrase. Okay. Third spot is just over the temples next to the eyes. Deep breath in. Even though I'm anxious, I'm safe. Once more. Deep breath in. Saying your phrase. Fourth spot is just on the cheeks. So tap, 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 tap. Continue your breath, continue your phrase. Okay. Next up, we have the upper lip. Deep breath in. Saying your phrase. Tap, 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 tap. Next, we have lower lip, just kind of on the chin, just below the lower lip. And just a couple more spots. Next up, we have collarbones. So deep breath in. Saying your phrase, even though I'm anxious, I'm safe. Okay. Next, we have armpits. So you can make kind of a soft fist and just tap, 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 just around the armpit. And switching sides, deep breath in, saying your phrase. And last two, we've got wrist claps. So you just kind of clap the underside of your wrist together. Deep breath in. And next up, we got pinky chops. All right, so outside of both pinkies, just kind of on the little webbing part of the finger, the outside of the hand here. Just pinky chops, deep breath in, saying your phrase. Great. And that's all of about 5 minutes or so. Can you kind of feel the physiological difference from doing that? Great. So I'll just review if you actually want to take notes for this one, just so you have it for home practice. There's 3 main components. It's the paced breathing, the use of phrases, even though I am X, I am Y, and then the physical gestures. Right. And the locations for the tapping is 15 to 30 taps, top of the head, tops of the eyebrows, sides of the temples, the cheeks, upper lip, lower lip, collarbones, armpits, wrist claps, pinky chops. All right. So I hope this has been helpful. Just to kind of gently review, there is this idea of basically kind of patterns that we can get stuck in and continuing to try to be skillful to act in a particular way, regardless of how we might be feeling in the moment. The access of where that goes is your ability to notice, to use mindfulness that you might have gotten stuck. Right? If we're looking at ways to kind of be skillful, we can kind of enhance a sense of accomplishment. We could look towards ways to have ourselves feel more connected, but also to enhance the sense of enjoyment. One way to do that is the idea of minimum effective change, right? So doing things that might take all of 30 seconds that are easy. So it's more about grooving the habit of doing it rather than kind of knocking it out of the ballpark. And then if you need strategies to kind of help soothe your physiology, tapping is kind of a nice way to do it. It has a way of kind of helping reset us. So before we part, are there any comments or parting thoughts? Any other way that I can be helpful today? It's good to see you all, and I hope you have a good weekend.